Welcome to Melanated View, where the thoughts, the experiences, and the opinions of 5 Black Canadians are shared with you in mind. The goal? To open up the dialogue in a safe environment. Because when there's conversation, that's when we learn. So today we just want to make sure that you're aware that we don't take for granted that we're in a pandemic. And so we've made sure that we are 6 feet apart. We have dividers here, and we also have our masks so that we are safe and that you feel safe watching us. Today's topic is about having a foot in 2 doors. And when we were talking about this, what was really neat was how we were one way at home and then another way when we left outside of our home. And I see you nodding your head. It's like, yep. So who wants to go first today?
Well, I wouldn't say, so the way that you just said it makes it sound like we were like completely different people. But in my experience, I wouldn't say I was a completely different person, but I noticed that I wasn't allowed to do the same things as my friends were allowed to do. So for example, when it came to going out on the weekend, my mom straight up said no back-to-back weekends, where all of my friends would be going out. They'd go out on Friday, they'd go out on Saturday, the next weekend they'd go out on Friday, they'd go out on Saturday. If I went out one weekend, I wasn't going out the next. I was staying in the house, I was doing my chores.
So what did going out mean though in your household?
I mean, just like in all ages or to the movies or something like that with my friends, but it was such a normal thing for all of my friends here in Canada to be going out, and I just was not able to do that.
No sleepovers until I was like in my late teens, but did not do the big sleepover thing. There was no all ages at my house. It was like, you are not going to be put in situations where you could be a stereotype or perpetuate that. Like, that's not for you. Kind of back to kind of some of our previous talks around, like, your job is your education. Being out there in the streets and whatever it is, like something simple as we get to teenagers, and all ages was a thing. And I remember being so envious, being like, how does everybody else get to go out? But I think for me, like that 2 foot, on one side, it came with explaining. I always felt like I was having to explain why culturally I wasn't allowed to do these things where my friends were allowed to. And I didn't know if that, I'm mixed race, so my mother's European and my dad is African American. So, that's heavily driven by both sides. So I do think there are a lot of intersections there. But my mom was very adamant around like, those aren't going to be your experiences. I'm going to shelter in it. It kind of comes from a point of caring, but definitely a lot of explaining as you're trying to be a teen.
So how many of us are first generation? Like first generation, meaning that we were born here and our parents came from somewhere else. Right, okay. So as a teenager, exactly what you said, you didn't get to do the same things that other kids got to do because back home that didn't happen. And Christina, you immigrated here.
I did,
Right.
and I have to say that I'm glad I had my teenage life back in the Caribbean because, well, parties didn't start till 10:30, and my dad was amazing. So he would drive, he was always the driver. He would drive my friends and I, he'd drop us off, he'd come back and pick us up maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, and if we weren't ready to leave and he was in a good mood, he'd say, keep partying, I'll be sleeping, and he'd just go
That's
back in the car and
amazing.
sleep. So
Are you
it was absolutely serious, absolutely serious. I will, however, say that I didn't break any rules. Like, we didn't drink, we didn't do any of that stuff because we knew that that would be the end of everything.
I'd say my dad was lucky with me because he had a very laissez-faire attitude, and not in that he didn't care, but he was more so like, do whatever you want, just don't be stupid. Like, really. And if it makes you happy, then okay. If you can like actually come to me and justify it, then there's no further explanation that's needed. But like, I was the type of kid that I just craved like structure and rules. So like, my dad would be working late hours and I would literally tell my friends, oh, sorry, my curfew's 10, like just making it up my own. So he never like had to worry about anything with me. But it's funny because like, even just thinking about being in the home, there's so many things that I didn't realize was specific to like my dad's culture, or I guess in turn my culture, until I had to move out and I was living on my own with other people and like had roommates, and I was like, how do you guys not clean your house every Sunday? Like, how do you guys not, like, where are these like what customs, or you know what I mean? Like, it's
Like
so different.
wearing your outside clothes on the bed.
Outside clothes stay outside.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, we call them good clothes.
Good clothes. Yes.
Good clothes to go out, and as soon as you came in the house, you changed and you put on your house clothes. That was, and I still do that. People laugh, they just don't get it. And I guess, you know,
Now people are learning because of
But
COVID. You know
pardon?
that.
Yeah.
Now it's like a regulation
Right,
in COVID.
everybody
They say
wants to
take
be-
your clothes off and
Yeah.
then change into something
Yeah.
else.
You know where I really found the difference was in discipline, right? So when I was a kid, we got spanked, right? And if we talked back, meaning expressed our own opinion, then it was like the worst thing you could do. You're so rude, you're so out, you know what I mean? And you hear about it all day long. And then I would go to my friend's house and they would be lippy with their parents, and I'm like, ooh.
And you'd be
nothing would-
waiting. You'd
I'm
be like, they're
waiting.
gonna die.
And
They're gonna
nothing
die.
happened. Nothing
And nothing
happened.
happens. No, 100%. My dad or my grandma could look at me, and I would like across a room, and I knew I was like, like I would just cut off whatever nonsense or foolery I was doing, and it's just like a look. I've tried to like finesse that look with my kids, but I don't know. I've lost the gift.
You're too smiley.
I know. My kids are like, and what? But no, like it's just like this look, and same thing. You'd be out with your friends, and you're like, they're gonna die. This child is gonna get whooped any second. And like growing up, like there was no qualms. Like I would get corrected in front of my friends. Like there was no like, let's have a private talk, Nancy, in the next room. Like it was like, what? Like you would just, it would be right there. Like that disciplinary action was like right there in that moment, correct.
And I made that change when I came to Canada because I grew up the same way. And I remember thinking, even as a teenager, you know, that a lot of the things I didn't do or did do that I shouldn't have perhaps, it wasn't because there was this moral compass. It was because I was afraid of what would happen, the consequences from my father. So I remember thinking that when I had children, I needed to learn a different way to discipline them, to be with them, so that they knew right from wrong for all the right reasons. And so that's one of the reasons why I studied early childhood education when I came to Canada. And I tried my best with my kids. Didn't always work, because there were times when I was referred to by my dear sweet son as that crotchety old Caribbean mother, to which I said, yes, that's who I am, and that's okay, right? So he has since acknowledged that that wasn't a bad thing, but.
You get older and
At
you
the
realize
time.
they're not bad. Like you get older and you get to a point where you embrace these traits. Like they're super nostalgic. And I think about how I raise my kids, and you know the perceptions of what my kids say, same as you know what your son said to you around like, you know, your mom's strict, and I'll wear that hat. Like, and it's now I celebrate it. Like, yeah, I am. Like, know that you can't, know that you can't play when you're with my child. And know that I will call that child, like I have no qualms. And if I have to wear that, it always gets associated back to being a black mom and the way I'm choosing to raise him. And he just says, your expectations of me are different. And it's funny because what was really profound is he was like, and I'm okay with that. I see what my friends are doing, but I'm okay with it. I get you. And you know, at 15, you're like, okay. And you only get small glimpses as a parent when your kids are telling you you're doing a good job. So I was like, I'll take that.
Just thinking back to the discipline, like you were saying, Christina, I think it's interesting because for my dad, I know him growing up, school was a huge part of discipline. Like when he was in class, he could get hit with a ruler, he could have all those interactions. Whereas like just thinking about where school sits here, or where discipline sits here, discipline doesn't sit in the school, discipline sits in the home, but accountability sits in the school. So like just something like having to bring home an agenda every day for my dad to sign, to say, I know what my kid's doing, the homework was done, you know? Like that's something that my dad just did not fundamentally understand. He's like, why do they care? So like at a very early age, and you know, nothing can come back from this, but he taught me to forge his signature so that he just wouldn't have to do it anymore. You know, and that's just like, I remember I would tell my friends like, yeah, I'm just practicing my dad's signature. And they'd just be like, you're doing what? Like it just didn't compute at all.
But
'Cause
you're
they all
accountable.
yeah,
So?
and they all had stay-at-home moms and stuff. Like it was so different growing up in the suburbs, like with a dad who just like, he's just like, do what you want. and I could, versus people who had like family literally from the minute they were home, food was made, like all these things that I just didn't experience.
Well, speaking of food, That is something else that I found different growing up because I came from a Caribbean home, so food was a very important part of our household. Like every Sunday, it was rice and peas and 2 meats and another carb and veggies. Like every Sunday, guaranteed. What was it like in your homes?
Pretty much the same. And I know coming here to Canada, I tried to emulate some of it, having never really been taught how to cook. So, but some of the things I found that were sort of interesting with other people that I met, like Canadians, was that they would be sort of one extreme to the other from, "Oh, wow, you know, you're from Guyana and Jamaica, you must be a really good cook. We'd love to try the food," to the other side of, "I don't want any of that food around me. Like it stinks, it's whatever," right? So it was, yeah, one or the other. But I did learn how to, and I think I make a pretty mean curry these days. Yeah.
Well,
And we
talk
do.
about a foot in two doors. I feel like, you know, growing up, proud Canadian, I was governed almost by this Trinidadian culture. And so when I told my family, hey, I'm vegetarian, it was blasphemy because there's so many dishes that we make that are either fish-based, you know, I'm talking goat and beef, all of the different curries, oxtail, cow foot soup, all of it was off limits. And my mom almost felt like she took it a bit personally because it was like I was refuting my culture. She couldn't cook for me. She couldn't provide for me the way that, you know, she felt like she had to. And it's a weird feeling to kind of deal with.
That wouldn't have worked in my house.
Exactly. And even after I left home, right? My mom loves to cook, and she would want to bring over food, and you know, every sort of holiday, Thanksgiving or what have you, she was making all the food, and she still felt as though, oh, what am I going to make for Renee? And that translates obviously to, like, you know, you go out somewhere for dinner, but with my mom, because of our culture so
She
heavy
can
on
send
meat,
me your share
Exactly.
anytime, okay? Because I know your mom's cooking.
she proudly would.
I think that's a really great point to call out because it's, again, a sense of like symbolism or a sense of identity of her being able to
Yes.
cook and care for you. And to have that removed, it was like an opportunity for her to like kind of reassess, like, how can I show my care? That's my love language. How do I show that love language? And when you've taken that piece that's so fundamental. So I think that's huge. Like in our European side, like it's eat, eat, eat. And you're always like, we joke, like eat, eat, eat. But it's like, that's the love language. So no, I think that that's interesting because I think we all communicate differently. And that's really the foot between two doors around how do we translate that as we go into kind of, you know, society and carry on that love language. And how do we do that when we're, you know, and you're getting questioned and people want to learn about it, right? So.
Definitely. So with regards to food and the types of food that you would eat in your homes, how did that translate with your friends? For example, I would say, oh, we're going to have curry goat for dinner. And they're like, goat? You're going to eat a goat? And it was like blasphemy. Like, are you crazy? Type of thing. Did that happen with you?
Not with me growing up, because of course I was there. But I tell you what did happen with me here as an adult. We bought a home, we were selling the house, and some friends came to visit, and they love curry, Canadians, and they wanted curry for dinner. So we made curry that weekend, had a wonderful time, and then 2 days later, the real estate agent comes in the house, and I get a phone call saying, "You can't cook this food in this house anymore."
wow.
And I was like, "What?" And she said, "If you want to sell this house, then you can't cook because it reeks." And I said, "Whoa, just a minute. Like, let's have a conversation about it. You might not care for the smell, and that's up to you, but don't talk about my house in that way, right?" So, yeah.
Wow.
So people do have different responses to the kinds of foods.
Well, we already look different, right? So then when we start bringing up foods that sound so blasphemous, right? Then people are already going to be like, okay, well, that maybe we aren't as alike. Maybe this person doesn't identify as Canadian, really. You know, it kind of makes you feel a type of way.
Yeah, you get those little steps, and then it just gets called back when
Yeah.
you bring beef tongue to school.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Not
It's funny though, because I never had those experiences until I moved to a predominantly white neighborhood. Because before that, it was just like, it was all racialized bodies. It was people of different cultures. So it would be like a thing at lunch where I'd trade whatever snack I had, whether it was chicken or like a full lunch, for like seaweed, or like there was just all this interchange, and there was an understanding that everyone came from a different home and everyone came with different food. And it's like, oh, what does this taste like? Like, I remember, I think one of the first things I tried that I'd never heard of was star fruit. And I was like, it's a fruit? That's what? And like, I just remember like taking a piece and like giving them something that I had. I don't even remember, but like it's moments like that that are rooted in my childhood that unfortunately were kind of stripped away when we moved when I was like 11 or 10 or so. And then that's when it became like, okay, I can't go to school after you cook with onions. I can't go to school after you cook with curry. Like, I'm not bringing chicken foot soup to lunch. Like, it's not happening. You know, when those hard lines I felt like I had to draw.
Just to avoid the questions. Like, I didn't have that experience because like everything, like I just didn't, I don't know. I didn't have that same sort of experience, but I just remember being so inquisitive. And I think it's probably because I grew up in more of a multicultural type environment where everyone was sharing. So I had that, I remember that vividly of like, we'd go through this experience and like open our lunch and we'd be sharing. And like, I think the weirdest thing was my mom would wrap my food up in very interesting items. Like every day it was a surprise. A lot of the times it was tinfoil, but like I think that just came based off of like opportunity and income at the time. But it's just that to me would be where I would stand out, is based off of, you know, what was I bringing my lunch in, or what was I wrapping it in, and why was that so different than the traditional Ziploc bag? So something so insignificant is like an ingrained memory of like I would have a sandwich in tinfoil. But that's all we had because, you know, we were poor back then. So like how do you kind of find your fit in the elementary school play yard with your random food, right?
Well, you know, with food, but that wasn't the only way we had our foot in two doors. With clothing as well. Like you had talked about love language. And when I was little, my mom made sure that my sister and I always dressed in really pretty clothes, and we had ribbons in our hair and Vaseline on our face, like our face was shiny. And it was so important to present your child in a way, because otherwise it was something against them. It was something against my mother.
We were always dressed up, like every video, every picture, full, like exactly. It was a pride piece for them, and you were a direct reflection of their image and their ability to care for you. So back to your piece, like that was their way to show that they care, and your output to the world, because they had to put you out there. They had to let go and release you, and they can't kind of guard you from everything in the world, but they can set you up for a success in how you look and how the world interprets you. Yeah. So I had that for sure.
And I love that I live in Canada because I don't have to wear high heels if I don't want to. And for a long time, I thought I had to. Love that I don't have to wear them anymore, or stockings. And I can wear my Converse and enjoy life. Comfy doodles. That's one of the things I appreciate. Because I know when I visit in the Caribbean, you know, women are still going to work with their stocking, their nylons, and their high heel shoes. And it's 30 degrees outside, and they're looking good, but I'm glad I don't have to do it.
You know, and I love that. I love the nylons. I don't know. There's a sense of security, I think. Maybe it's just my own thing. Maybe I need to go analyze that.
There's nothing wrong with a good spank. There's nothing wrong.
You know, and it looks great. I'm just glad I don't have to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any restrictions with clothing?
Not really. Like I said, but I was just like, don't be dumb. And just for myself, sorry, I know that, but just for myself, I always dressed like more modestly. I think one thing I've come more into is, because like I said, I've said many times, I grew up in the suburbs. So like for some reason, I just dressed like a 40-year-old woman until I was like 19. It was terrible, like a cardigan and like ill-fitting pants. I literally wore like mom jeans with like elastic waist, even though I didn't even need it.
You might have made mom jeans a thing.
No, not the cool ones. Not these ones now. Now I wear these with pride, but I'm talking like elastic waist, like Reitmans and that kind of stuff.
Northern Reflections.
But Lord, now it's actually funny how clothes used to be like a separator for my family, and not just thinking my dad, like my extended family, my aunts and my cousins and stuff. But now that I've leaned more into my style, and I tend to buy more like thrifted stuff or interesting clothes, they'll say, oh my gosh, I remember when those jeans were like in style when we were like your age and that kind of stuff, because a lot of the clothes that I'm inspired by and that I purchase are actually from the 80s and the 90s. right? So it's actually brought us together in a really cool way, where before I would just wearing cardigans. It was terrible.
I just keep thinking about this terrible grade 2 picture day photo.
We need to have it. by the
Oh,
way.
I
We need to
mean,
see it.
maybe. But it, like, I was just disheveled. I was wearing a lavender sweatsuit. It had an ice cream cone on it. And the reason why I'm being very descriptive here is because I feel like anyone else could have worn the same outfit and come in for picture day and that would be fine. But I remember when my mom saw this photo, she was so upset with me. She was so upset with me because she was like, how come you let your hair go like that? Like, don't you see? Like, people are gonna look at you differently. Like, you know, how come you had this sweatsuit on? You know, like, it was my grandma that chose the sweatsuit for me, but, you know, she was like, she was so upset because I had looked so different in my photo than, you know, what I should have looked like.
Clothing, food, all of these things, we have very similar stories, even though we were brought up in very different places. But at the same time, there's a lot of differences, right? And so it's bridging that gap almost.
I remember, you know, having a student who talked about, she lived in the Toronto area, and she was from Nigeria, and she was telling me how we were talking about this because I worked with many university students, and we would often have this conversation about, you know, how they'd grown up versus now that they were at university and how things were different. But she said all the time growing up, like she went to school with a wide variety of you know, students from various places. They were all friends, they could hang out, you know, they could go to the mall and hang out in the food court and stuff like that together. But when she came home, her parents were really clear, you know, this is who you are. And so I remember she said that every Friday night, for example, they'd go to their culture club, right? And she was never allowed to bring her friends there because only their group of people would be there. And so she had, and it's something I think you learn how to navigate. You learn how to be who you are, you know, out with your friends, and then when you go home. I know, for example, just in terms of the way we speak, when we're all together as a family, we're not sitting like this, you know, politely. We're like all over and, you know, yeah, man, and talking to somebody upstairs versus it's very, very different. And people don't always understand that either. You know, I've had people say, how come your family argue all the time? And we're not arguing, we're just discussing.
Yeah,
It's just
yelling
a
is our love
different kind of
language.
discussion.
Yes, no, the yelling is it. And you know
Right?
what? I gotta say that, like, that's one fundamental difference that I've noticed growing up that people in, like, Canadians just didn't understand, is that, like, when you grow up, like, especially in the European side of my culture, you would you would hash it out on the spot. Like, it'd be this big thing, but after you're good. And it was like trying to explain, especially when like friends would come over or you're out in public, like it looks crazy, but they communicate and they get it all out and there's no resentment and we move on. And I think that's just something, like, again, there's definitely the time and the place, but it's one unique difference about how we communicate. And again, there's just intersections between all of our stories.
I remember as a kid, something that you said, Christina, with your student, Nigerian student. When I was a kid, I grew up in northern Manitoba. So literally in the town of 26,000, there were 50 Black people, right? And so we would get together, and I valued those times we could get together because then I really felt like I could be me. Not that I was being somebody else when I was somewhere, but I just felt comfortable. There was a certain level of comfort I felt when I had people that looked like me around me. And I think that's really important. And it's not necessarily that I'm preaching you need to separate yourself from everyone else, but more so understanding the importance of growing up and seeing people that look like you.
100%. I think one of my really, really good friends in high school was, you know, same as me, like mixed race. We were the same sort of complexion. We had a bond. We had, you know, our parents had separated. Like, we literally had a very, very similar experience. And to be able to have found her and have met her and go through those, like, there's just something different to be said and a rawness that you can share when sometimes you find someone at any aspect in life that has your same likeness, and that you can kind of, again, take the veil off, be vulnerable and sit in that space. But it was just something profound, especially as we kind of go through our identity. And the two, the foot, for me being mixed race, I'm wearing those shoes every day, and I have to decide which shoe am I wearing. And I've always identified as Black, but to have someone that understood that internal fight, and that fight for not acceptance, but visibility, was huge. So finding the right people to surround yourself with to validate kind of how you're thinking about things is a big help as far as freeing. Yeah.
And talking about people that look like you, I mean, I'm thinking of the difference in Canada of the people that you look at and you smile at, and the people that you don't so much look at and smile at. But it's such a Canadian thing to do, to just smile at everyone. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that? Do you guys have the same experience?
Just not a prolonged eye contact, because you don't want to give off that vibe. But I did feel that if I, that 30 seconds too long, it was like, hey, it went from hello to hey. And it just turned so fast. So being hyper vigilant of that prolonged stare. But it's also kind of a sign of kind of respect as well within the culture. And I don't know, what do you guys?
Yeah.
I can go anywhere, and if I lock eyes with anyone Black, I'm like, hello.
Yeah.
And they do it right back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's this unspoken thing where you're like, I see you.
Yeah. Just the other day, my son asked me, he's like, Mommy, how come every Black person knows you? And I'm like, every Black person doesn't know me. He's like, but every time we see a Black person, you nod and you smile. And they nod and smile back. I'm like, because it's just something that when two Black people walk past each other,
Conscious,
you acknowledge
yeah.
one each other. And you smile and you just hi.
Like,
doesn't
you're
mean
out
anything.
here, I'm out here, what's up?
Exactly.
Here in this
It's
moment.
being part of something bigger, and that was really the difference in this experience between American and Canadian. In the US, I felt like we were all, there was no question on what kind of Black are you? Or, you're not the same, or there, those respects of colorism. I didn't feel that. I felt like we were all minorities and we were all in this together, and there was that acknowledgement of I see you. Coming to Canada in high school, I really got a flavor of Caribbean, Jamaican, I didn't, you know what I mean? It was just such an eye-opener. But to be part of something bigger, and that head nod and this symbolism, it's just something, it's like a cool club that we all signed up for at birth.
It's just part of being Canadian.
Yeah.
And some people will look at, we're thinking of the title, A Foot in Two Doors. Some people will look at that. And I think even when we brought it up as a group, it was like, this is kind of tough. But it's even just having this conversation, your feet are in both of those doors. You still have people on both sides that kind of marry that experience, and it makes it so wholesome and so varied, but so important.
Yeah.
And I just love it. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes. No, it does. It does. Well, you've heard our view, and now we want to hear yours. So please visit us on Instagram and leave your comments and leave your questions, and let's have a conversation. We look forward to seeing you next time.